I grew up in the South, and growing up in the South, I've always felt this real constant pressure when approaching language or linguistics. Even so, ever since I can remember, I've always been this real avid storyteller, and my main audience was most of the time my mother, and she would half listen as she cooked or cleaned or fed somebody. I was the oldest of 9 growing up, so you can imagine how I'd have to fight for attention. When I would tell these stories to my mother, I would just go into glorious detail of all the day's happenings. And she would nod in agreement, and when my story was finished, she'd always look at me and say, "Now, Destiny, you know that was only half the story." And I would then explain to her that the other half was for her imagination, and run away before she had any time to ask if I'd been in any trouble that day. I'm Destiny Woodhouse, and this is my story.
Damn it, I hate being stuck behind these tractors.
I grew up in Westmoreland, Tennessee. It's very rural, very small, not a lot of people. Everybody knows everybody type of town. Filled with hillbillies, big trucks, farming. Hicktown, Hillbilly Central, no Walmart, no McDonald's. Very small, everybody knows everybody.
This is the new Fleetwood building where we celebrate Mule Day. There's a big parade where everyone gets to look at all the mules in Westmoreland, and there's even a pageant where you could be Queen of Mule Day if you wanted to.
In my family, I'm kind of known as the cycle breaker. I was the first person to graduate from high school. I was the first person to go to college. I was the first person to graduate from community college. In December, I'll be the first person to graduate from a university. I was the first person to not have a baby by the time they were 18. First person to hold a stable job. A lot of cycles broken by me. I grew up the oldest of 9. My mom's disabled, so she couldn't work. And my stepdad refused to work, or he would get a job and then he wouldn't show up. So our income came from her disability check, which is about $1,000 a month. So trying to feed 11 people on $1,000 a month, not ideal. Sometimes we get supplemental income from him betting on chickens, cockfighting, selling drugs. Real piece of work, that man. So it was a struggle growing up with $1,000 a month, 9 kids, 2 parents, neither able to work or wanting to work. There was a lot of nights without electricity, a lot of days without water, nights and days without food. Growing up, my grandmother was a guiding force in my life. She had to drop out of school in the 3rd grade, and she was a huge advocate for education. She says that the government can take everything from you, but they can't take your education away. So something that she's always doing is reading and trying to learn a little bit more. I would say I experienced my first literacy heartbreak in the 3rd grade. I remember standing dumbfounded as my teacher told me that the way that I spoke made me sound ignorant. And she then accredited my ignorance to my grandmother after she asked me who taught me how to speak. And while beaming in front of the whole classroom, I said, "My grandmother." At the time, I really couldn't understand why this teacher was calling myself and my grandmother ignorant. And this really caused an identity uproar within me. I began to stop talking in the classroom altogether. And this made my stories to my mother even more eventful because I hadn't said anything all day. I feel that it's always in the classroom when I learn the most about myself. In some cases, this can be a good thing. Some cases bad. Although I feel with every case, it's really shaped who I am as a person. My next life-shaping encounter with language and literature was a good one. In the 7th grade, I was assigned The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. And up until this point in my life, I'd really never read anything that I could personally relate to. In the novel, there's this character named Johnny, and he grew up in a home really similar to mine. He came from kind of a rough neighborhood, and his family fought a lot. They had little to no money. And I just remember having an epiphany during the classroom discussions as these other students would talk and fumble with issues like poverty and abuse. They were completely unaware that some kids really face these challenges. I thought for so long and hard about speaking up, about talking about why Johnny decided to sleep outside in the streets, and about living in an impoverished home, living in an abusive home, and why he was just stressed out and scared all the time. But Instead, I would remain quiet, and to this day, I really do regret not speaking up on Johnny's behalf. After that, my love for literature really emerged, and I wanted to read more and more about everything, and especially characters that I can relate to on a personal level. Okay, so when I was in 8th grade, I was diagnosed with a heart condition. And because of that, I ended up missing a large amount of school in 8th grade, which resulted in me being put into a lower level English class when I was a freshman. So they called it English competency. It was for the kids that didn't do as well in English as other kids. And this teacher really saw something in me, like my love of literature. I would read a lot. She had these book reports that we did, and I would do all kinds of book reports just all the time because I love to read. And she approached me and she said, "Destiny, you need to be in the honors class. I don't know why you're in here in the first place. You are not, you don't belong with these other kids." And I was like, okay, how hard is honors? So starting in the 10th grade, I took honors English, which really is where I fit in more. And I just loved it. I love the atmosphere. I love being in the honors class. We read more advanced books and we wrote more advanced papers. We talked more about literature in an event setting. I really thrived in that atmosphere. 11th grade rolled around and they put me in the honors course, which is what they should have done because I took the honors English last year. And I walked in that first day. I was so ready. English was my favorite subject because I was actually kind of good at it. This teacher had told me that I deserved to be in the honors track. And so I was really excited. I go in the first day. I'm like, I wonder what we're going to read. I wonder what we're going to talk about. I was just ready to expand my knowledge and my love of literature. And I walked past the podium and she said my name. She said, Woodhouse. And I turned around and I was like, yeah. She said, oh no, you don't belong here. You're in the wrong place. You don't belong here. This isn't your classroom. And I was like, is this honors English 11? And she said, yeah, you're in the wrong place. You need to be in the standard class. This isn't, we're going to get this sorted out. And she basically took me by the hand and led me to the guidance counselor's office so that she could get it sorted out. She told me that she knew my stepdad. And so she knew that I wasn't supposed to be in this classroom, that I was supposed to be in the regular class. And so that night I went home and I was telling my mom about what had happened. And I always only tell half the story. So I did leave out the part where I got demoted to the standard class and wasn't allowed to stay in the honors course. It was a shitty feeling. I felt like trash. She said that she knew my stepdad, so she knew me. She immediately correlated us together, saying that because she had him in class and she knew how he was, she knew how I was, even though she had never even met me before. And my growth, education, and confidence was in this way limited to who my family was. Some of these are issues that people don't think about often. And they're some of the most prominent things I had to deal with when getting out of Westmoreland, and in a way when getting out of poverty. Whenever I think of growing up in my childhood, I always picture playing outside with my siblings in the heat and in the mud. When I was about 12 years old, I was outside with my brother Dalton. He's about 2 years younger than me, so I guess he would have been about 10. And I remember on this day, my stepdad came home early. He normally came home around 4, but it was about noonish, and he pulled into the driveway. He was like holding his back, and he had tweaked it or something, and he went inside. And my brother looked at me, and he said, "That's what I'm going to have to do." And I didn't understand. I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "I'm going to have to be a contractor when I get older. I'm going to have to do that too." And it was really at this moment that I felt betrayed by the world. I felt an injustice. It was unfair that everybody else got different opportunities and we had to do what had always been done in our family. I felt very upset at the fact that my brother would have to do manual labor for the rest of his life. And it was really at this point that I determined that I was going to do everything I could to show him that that doesn't have to be his fate, that he doesn't have to go down that path if he doesn't want to. So I started enrolling in honors classes and started doing volunteer work and started working at McDonald's and doing all this stuff trying to pad my application for college, making sure that I made straight A's and studying for the ACT as best as I could, applying for scholarships. I was going to make sure that I did everything in my power to get to college so that he knew that he did not have to do manual labor for the rest of his life if he didn't want to. Okay. When I left for college, it was pretty scary. Terrifying, I might even say, just because I was very scared that I wouldn't be able to keep my lights on or to eat or to keep the water going. It was so hard for my mom and my stepdad, and that's a two-person income. I thought that there was no way that I'd be able to do it myself with just one income and a part-time job at that. All throughout college, I've held 2 jobs or 3 sometimes, just to make sure that that never happened to me. I know, like, growing up as a kid, that was the one thing that I was, like, the most worried about. It's like, when I get older, the electricity's never gonna get cut off, the water's always gonna be running, I'm always gonna have food to eat, I'm never gonna go to sleep hungry. Those were my things when I was a kid. Those were the things that those were my goals that I was gonna work toward. Going to college really was a way to do those things. Because in my mind, I thought that the only way to keep all those things happening, to keep the lights on and to keep the water on and to keep food in the house, was to have a college degree. No one in my family had ever done that, though. No one had even graduated from high school. All the women in my family had kids before they were 18, and they all dropped out. My grandmother even dropped out in the 3rd grade. So to me, getting to college was the only way to keep those things. And as a kid, the only successful women that I had ever seen were nurses or teachers, and I don't like blood. So that pretty much left teaching. My most recent literacy heartbreak was during the SEP program at Western. If you don't know, the SEP program is set up for soon-to-be teachers, English and history. They go in and they do a semester of student teaching at Franklin Simpson High School, and then the next semester we go in and do a semester of student teaching at Bowling Green High School, and then your last semester you do just full student teaching. I had a really tough time during SEP 2. The professor that I had didn't particularly like me. She didn't like my background and where I came from. And I know this because the very first day we had to give these PowerPoints talking about our family, and I happened to mention that I was the first person in my family to graduate from high school. And then I started talking about how I was the first person to go to college, and I'm going to be the only college-educated person in my immediate and extended family. And then she just started making all these assumptions about me and about how I was lower class, and she told me multiple times that I didn't have a middle-class mindset, that I had a low-class mindset, and because of that I wouldn't be able to relate to the kids. I would never be able to work with kids who have money because I didn't grow up with money. There's a lot of discrimination based on socioeconomic status in that class. She started failing all the papers that I turned in, saying that I would never really understand how to be a teacher because teachers are middle-class citizens, and I've never been a middle-class citizen before, so I don't know how to act. And I don't hang around enough middle-class people to be able to know how to act like I'm from the middle class. She said that the people in my family were probably incarcerated and on drugs, which may be true. I may have people in my family who are incarcerated and on drugs, but she didn't know that. She was just making that assumption. And even so, that has nothing to do with my ability to be a teacher or anything to do with the knowledge that I have surrounding literature or my ability to teach English. College was everything I expected and nothing I could have ever imagined. I took my love for literature and I signed up for the first 5 literature courses available. Shortly after, I started working for Cengage, helping them develop products including MindTab. They're an education technology company. I later met the CEO of Cengage, Michael Hansen, and he hired me as a keynote speaker for the company. Getting on a plane for the first time, I got to travel around the country, sharing my story and advocating for education in front of hundreds of educators. I owe parts of my everlasting personality, confidence, and growth to my love of literature. It's important for you to know that this is not a sad story. This is a story about confidence, which to me is success remembered. This is a story about making it through those obstacles, breaking cycles, and doing what you need to do to keep the lights on. Although you should know, this is only half the story.